Well, hello everyone, and welcome to Easy Mini Painting with me, Christopher Ridge, and we're going to finish up the Mansions of Madness expansion, Path of the Serpent, with the big bad Basilisk right here. The big, mean, green, fighting snake machine, and he's not going to be very difficult to paint, although he is going to be time-consuming just because of the sheer mass of him, the size and the surface area that needs to be painted. So just kind of be prepared for that, but why don't we just get started here?
Now the very first thing that we did was we did a base coat of Goblin Green across the whole miniature. We basically just used that as a primer, and that will just work pretty well as a base coat for everything, because I wanted to go for sort of a green color scheme, and what I specifically wanted to go to was I think it's called an emerald tree boa. That's sort of what motivated me to go with the color scheme that I'm going with here. But after you get a nice solid coat of Goblin Green on there, the first thing that I'm going to focus on is the mouth. So I'm going to take some Warlock Purple right here, and I'm just going to apply a nice even coat across the whole mouth. And you don't need to use a super detailed brush because it's not very fine details right here. So just sort of coat the mouth with Warlock Purple. Alright, and a little bit something like that. That just gets a nice pink mouth right there. It's very, very bright, but we'll do a sort of thing that we've done for previous miniatures on the channel, which is we're going to soften them up a little bit with the softer color. And to do that, we're going to take some Barbarian Flesh. Now, you might give it a minute or two just to make sure that that mouth is completely dry, because if it's wet at all, then that might lead to a little bit of difficulties when you're dry brushing here. Probably not a huge deal, but just a little bit. So I'll take out a nice flat dry brush like this. Going to load up some paint onto the brush, but wipe off most of it. And then what we're going to do is we're just going to kind of lightly go over the whole mouth. You can get a little bit onto like the surrounding scales and that kind of thing. I think that it'll be okay because we plan to go over the scales with an even lighter shade of green afterward. So if you get a little bit of this Barbarian Flesh onto, I don't think it'll be a huge deal, but if you can, just try to avoid going over all of the green scales. You're just wanting to apply this Barbarian Flesh to soften up this nice bright pink a little bit. And if you just use a sort of dry brush to do that, I think that that will get the trick done pretty easily here. Alright, a little bit something like that. And you can add as little or as much of that Barbarian Flesh as you want, but as you can see, that gives it the sort of organic mouth, snake mouth kind of look. I think that that looks pretty cool. So I'm going to rinse off that brush completely, and we're done with that color. Then we're going to dive right into an even larger dry brush, and I'm going to get out that nice bright jungle green, and then we're going to use that to base coat the entirety of the body, basically, and that will just brighten up the body a little bit. Now, one thing that you may notice when you're doing this is that the jungle green color isn't that much brighter than the goblin green that we used. If you want to make it even brighter, you could take out some moon dust here, and you can mix in a little bit of moon dust as well. So I could just take out, the same very large brush like this and just sort of mix those colors together a little bit until you kind of get the color that you want, that nice sort of fair green color. There we go. That's looking a little bit better. Like a nice sort of bright, vibrant lime chartreuse green. That's the sort of color scheme that I'm looking for, at least. You can kind of do whatever you want. You don't even really have to do this, to be honest. If you just like the scales to just have a solid green color like that, and then if you just want to use the Quickshade that we're going to use at the end, you can totally do that. But I kind of want to just have a little bit of, a little bit of extra pop on the scales. I just want a little bit more color definition on there, and as you can see, that kind of does the trick. That just kind of makes those scales pop out a little bit better, and super easy to do. You just take out a big fat dry brush like this, get a little bit of paint onto the bristles, wipe off most of it, and then just go over the whole thing like this. That's all that you really need to do, and I think that that will give you a pretty cool effect. So I'm going to do that across the whole body, all of the scales. There we go. So now that body has a nice sort of like yellowish, light greenish tint to the whole thing. And I think that that kind of brings it all together, and I think that that makes it look very nice. And what we'll do too is using that moon dust, using that nice sort of, bright yellow with a little bit of a green tint to it, that sort of bright yellow color, is I'm just gonna get all of the, I don't really know the terminology. I hope that somebody who studies snakes can maybe correct me here in the comments or something. But the abdominal scales, I'm not really sure. All of the smooth scales that are meant to be sort of the soft underbelly of the snake, why don't we just go over all of those with a nice even layer of this moon dust color? And I think that will give some additional variety that I think will look appropriate and cool. It's proving to be a little bit strange to kind of get right into the inside of the sort of coil here, but because so much of it is obscured by the Basilisk's own body anyway, I would say don't stress out too much about it. Just kind of do the best that you can. Just try to get at the best angles that you can, and just sort of eyeball it. Trust your own judgment. You will do just fine, I promise you. All right, there we go. That's pretty cool. So now he's nice and green and yellow. He is very, very, very bright, very striking. I like it. So I'm gonna rinse off that brush completely. Now what I'm gonna do with that moon dust as well is I'm just going to dot those eyes, and that way that should give those nice prominent sort of like yellowish eyes. And if you want just like a shade that is a little bit different from the skin, because we did use this a little bit for when we were doing the dry brush coat on all of the scales. If you want just a little bit of a shade, but still those nice yellow eyes, you can use demonic yellow. And that way it would just be a little bit different, but that's up to you. I figured we might as well just try to use as few colors as possible, just to make it easy for folks who maybe don't necessarily have the Army Paint or Mega Paint set if they're having to get all of these paints individually. So yeah, you can just use really any sort of yellow that you want. You can use this sort of, lemony yellow color that is this moon dust, or you can use the bright mustard yellow of demonic yellow, whatever you prefer. But as simple as that, we're just gonna get those eyes on there. And now for the fun part. I'm gonna take out some matte white, and then we'll work on some weird sort of patterns on the scales. Now, these emerald tree boas have these interesting sort of, I don't really know what you call these, sort of like triangular patterns of white scales on their backs, and I figured that we'll try to emulate that just a little tiny bit. Now, one thing that I would say is that confidence is key. Just don't be afraid to really, really do it. Don't be afraid to have some fun and just go for it, but also just take your time and go ahead and do each scale individually. Now that sounds kind of daunting. That sounds a little bit like, well, I can't do that. I can't do that precise of details. Well, remember, this is a very large miniature, and these scales are exceptionally large. So painting each scale one at a time, I promise you, it's really not that big of a deal. So just don't be afraid to go for it. Like I said, confidence. Confidence is key. And we'll try to emulate, like I said, a sort of like this weird alternating triangular pattern. As you can see, it's not quite perfect, but honestly, I don't think it really has to be. I think that as long as you just sort of get a loose sort of pattern of white scales on the back, I think that might get that sort of look that you're wanting from that emerald tree boa. In fact, I might, because I was kind of going through this like, straight line all the way down, I might kind of like break it up a little bit, kind of like what I just did up here, actually. I might break it up a little bit the further I go down the sort of body of the snake. Yeah, this kind of thing right here. So just sort of look at it as you go. Look for the prominent scales. Everything will just sort of, fall into shape. If you follow a loose sort of pattern, and you can just kind of do whatever pattern that you want, I think that anything will look pretty darn cool. Just make sure to stick to it, and make sure to, just paint individual scales. Again, don't just do like, splotches of patterns, all over everything. Try to keep each scale its own color. And I think that as long as you do that, you'll be just fine. The only thing is that doing this pattern is proving to be rather tedious, so it's kind of taking a little while. I might do this in kind of like bursts here. And you know what, how about this? How about we take a little lesson from this? You don't need to knock out an entire miniature in one sitting. It's okay to do multiple sittings, as long as you don't just like, you know, start things and leave things. I think that we're all guilty to some degree of saying, let's get started on this miniature, and then not really finishing it. I am going to take a little bit of a break and come back to this later. And I don't think it's even going to matter to you guys, because I think the way that I'm going to edit this is that it's all just going to be a seamless cut. But that's what I'm going to do. I'm just going to take a little break. All right, well, I am back. It is the next day for me. I've taken a little bit of a break from this, and I feel a little bit refreshed, ready to tackle this again. All right, and that looks pretty cool, as long as you just take your time and you just do one individual scale at a time, and as long as you stick to any kind of loose pattern, then I think that you will be just fine. You don't need to do anything super duper crazy detailed. Again, if you just get a nice even coating on a really simple pattern there, that should do you quite nicely. So I'm going to rinse off that brush, and then I'm going to get out some skeleton bone, and I think that skeleton bone will probably work nicely for all of the teeth and the fangs, you know, all of the bony sort of spine needles and that kind of thing. So we'll go over all of the teeth first using skeleton bone. Just go over each tooth one at a time like this, and you don't need to use a very like detailed brush. You can just use any sort of standard size brush like this. Luckily, the thing about this Basilisk is that because it is such a large miniature, you don't need very, very small brushes in order to do anything really. Like maybe a little bit for the eyes that we did earlier, but even then, like I think that a standard size brush will probably do you just fine. It's interesting because I'm noting as I'm doing the underside of the mouth here that there are like kind of multiple rows of teeth. It's got like sort of two rows on there, which is just interesting. All right, so now that skeleton bone has made a really, really, really nice coloration for all of those teeth. And the last thing that we're gonna do with this color as well is we're gonna get the horns, spines, I don't really know. I call them spines, spine needles, I don't know, whatever you wanna call them, but the little spikes just sort of jutting out of the back there. All right, and now we've got those nice spines on there, and you know what? The bulk of the miniature is honestly done. And to bring it all home, I'm just gonna go into some dark tone as a Quickshade, basically just a liquid black Quickshade, and we're just going to coat the entirety of the miniature using this Quickshade. And that's it, we're done after that. I think if you want, you could use strong tone. If you want, you could use a sort of like, you know, brownish Quickshade, but I think that the black will go with like the combination of the scales and like the green scales and the white scales a little bit more smoothly, I think. But that's just an opinion. I think that if you want to do like a brown, you know, Quickshade, a brown sort of like tone, that's fine. You can do whatever you're comfortable with, but I think that the black one will do a-okay just here. So I'm just going to coat the entirety of the miniature with this, and then I'm going to let it dry. And then after I let it dry, I'm going to cover it in a matte varnish, just to give it a little bit of an extra layer of protection and all that, just to bring it all together and make sure that the colors are nice and smooth. And then we are done, so that'll be it.
All right, everyone, and that is the Basilisk from Mansions of Madness. The very last thing that I did is that I just took some matte black and I just added the little eye slits in there, and I also just added a little bit surrounding the eyes just to bring them out a little bit. And then for the varnish, what I actually ended up doing was I did like kind of a blending of matte and gloss varnish, and I just sort of mixed those, you know, like 3 or 4 drops of each of those, and then a couple drops of water, mixed all that together, and then added this semi-glossy, semi-matte varnish, and I think that that is pretty appropriate for this really cool snake skin right here. So that's it, everybody. If you liked the video, go ahead and throw it a like. I don't really know what I'm gonna do for the next series of miniatures. I guess, I don't know. I haven't thought about it too much, but I'll come up with something. I've got some stuff to figure out, I guess. I don't know. Well, in any case, I thank you for watching, and we'll see you next time on Easy Mini Painting. Have a good night, everyone.